Greetings and salutations, friends. Character NPC back at the gaming table. Once again, continuing on with the Invasion Malta tutorials, ramblings, whatever you want to call it. I can't say that I'm really helping everyone clarify things, but I'm having fun doing it. So hope others get something out of each one of these. Today I want to talk about airdrops, paradrops. There were some terms used in World War II by the British, paradrops, and so I'm going to try to stick with the nomenclature used in the game, paradrops. Airborne invasions, right? That's what we're talking about. And to start off, I need to mention that you should always refer back to the scenario, special rules, and special situations if it's about the first turn, or know them as you're playing through the game, because there's often some tweaks and differences to the various rules, sometimes through the entire scenario, based on what the special scenario rules say. So don't ever forget to go in and check if any of these paradrop things that I've said are contradicted by the scenario special rules, because they might be there. Okay, so we're going to assume that there's already been a strategic segment with weather and everything, and there's been a few activation markers already drawn from the activation pool. In my case, I use a Crown Royal bag to hold all the chits. And the next one that gets pulled is Conf Group West. So Conf Group West has been activated. And you can see here, Conf Group Kuna has some infantry paratroopers that can do a paradrop this turn. So the first thing that we do, since we're now in the operations sequence, we have Airborne Operations phase. And you place an airhead and a drop hex marker. You place each conf group in the desired drop hex. If there were gliders, you'd use the same. And then there's anti-aircraft fire. So the Allied anti-aircraft units would be able to try to fire at the air transports that were dropping off the paratroopers. And then you'd move on to the drift, on the drift chart. The landing conditions are determined based on the drift chart and the terrain. Then you conduct any required drift combat, if there is any. And the rest of this is regular air transport, so a little different than the paradrop. So that's where it would end. So we have our activation marker. And the first thing we're going to do is use the airhead marker. This basically represents supply and all the logistics and things that are needed for paratroopers to conduct their actions. And so we're going to place it here in this clear hex. It has to go in a clear hex. It can't go in a town. It can't go on rough terrain. You can imagine what it would be like to have to land in a parachute on rough rocks and such. It doesn't make any sense. So obviously this is going to be here in some clear terrain. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to place the drop hex marker for this particular conf group that we're dropping. And it's going to go within 4 hexes of this airhead. But also, I want this in clear terrain because I have to follow the drift table. So I'm going to use this one in hopes of us getting, some limited clear terrain through here in a couple of hexes. You can see here the drift table. And as I mentioned, looking through the scenario, special circumstances and their special rules for the scenarios tell you certain things. In this case, for the Laros scenario 4, the Laros invasion, you're using drift table B. So that's the one that's here, but there are 2 drift tables on the Malta map, And basically A and B, it seems, without pulling it out and looking at it right now, I believe that it changes the direction. So you can imagine it would be wind kind of vertical, even though north is in this direction on the map. This is right now east and west, and then the other Malta A drift table, I believe, is a north and south type direction. So you would have a choice on that scenario, in those scenarios, versus here where you only have the choice to use B. So we would then land the units on the drop hex. You can see here, place Kampfgruppe on corresponding drop hexes, place glider units on any hex. In this case, though, we want to stack these. It's important that you stack them also because as the drift table is used, it's going to affect units in a particular order. So we're going to stack these in such a way that the one that is on top would be the first to take a step loss or be disrupted. So I'm going to stack these in this particular order with the headquarters on the bottom. I'm also going to check the stacking limit. So I have 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's exactly 9. I place them on the drop hex. The next thing we do then is conduct AA against the Kampfgruppe. To do that, you would use the AA table. So depending on the number of AA points that you could fire at them within range, you would then roll a 10-sider and then see if anyone would take any step losses. Once anti-aircraft fire is complete, you're deciding on using drift table A or B. In this case, like I said, it would be drift table B. And you can see here how the roll would react. But you have some die roll modifiers here. +1 if the drop hex is enemy occupied, +1 for each anti-aircraft unit firing against this Kampfgruppe. It's +2 for Italian Kampfgruppes, so some scenarios will get a write-off just a +2 the die roll modifier. You can see here, though, that having the anti-aircraft fire is really significant. So it's not just did they take a step loss while you were firing at them, but how much are they disrupted after the fact can be very significant. In this case, though, let's just say we didn't have any anti-aircraft fire. It was already clear as it is on the map. So I roll the die. It's a 5. I would choose 5 here, which is 1 off in this direction, right? So we would go 5, then 4, then 3. 3 or less is here. So everybody else would land here. We would start here with the first unit, second unit, all the rest would be here. So we would have our first unit landing here, our second unit landing here, and everyone else would be landing in the drop hex. Now we have the conduct once for each Kampfgruppe using drift diagram. Place units in their landing hexes. That's what we just did. After the fact, landing conditions. Determine for each unit, if not already disrupted, the unit is disrupted after landing if it lands on a rough or urban terrain hex that is not the drop hex. Anti-tank and artillery units always land disrupted or perhaps eliminated. And then conduct drift combat. In this case, we didn't have any drift combat because we didn't land on any enemy units. In our example, these 2 units would be disrupted because they landed in rough terrain. Now, we didn't have to conduct any drift combat because there were no enemy units that we landed on. If we had needed to conduct drift combat, you can see here everything is completed within the air operations phase, so none of the other combat actually takes place except drift combat, so it is unique. In drift combat, you can see there's no close air support, there's no bombardment, no allied reserve movement. Overstacking is a definite issue, and basically things either retreat or are eliminated. And overstacking is never good in this situation. And if an attacking unit is reduced to less than 1 attack strength point due to disruption, it cannot attack and is thereby eliminated. So there's some real conditions here that make drift combat a bad thing in general. But if you were to go through these rules and know them and be able to use them effectively, units of either or both sides can retreat into or through a drift combat hex, but they cannot add to the combat strength in that combat. Where the defender does not retreat from a fort, the dropped units become required to retreat. Retreat is required because units of opposing sides cannot occupy the same hex. So there's some real details here. In general, if you go through the entire airborne operation, you are taking a real big risk parachuting down onto all of these rocks. And then beyond disruption, you have the real opportunity to take some step losses. You could end up in a situation like this where it might be valuable, where you could try to parachute into here as a last second opportunity to try to take even this over here. Over here is a sudden victory in some scenarios for the Axis, so you might take a chance and see if you could find a way to make it out of here, maybe in here with an invasion, multiple invasions and a paradrop, and try to take that hex and a couple of others. You can see how they're concentrated. There's 2 other victory conditions here, victory hexes. So it could be used effectively, I am sure. For me, it turned out that it just added to forces that were able to combine with Kampfgruppe Ost. So East and West met here to take these 2 objective hexes, which took a while. And in the end, my own experience was that I started to be aggressive too late, and the amount of attrition that the Allies can take to hold off the Axis really requires them to step up their game in both aggressiveness as well as the tactical techniques of using what's available to you to effectively take invasions and risks that result in victory hexes, right? I mean, like I could have chose some different amphibious invasion hexes that might have resulted in better results. There's so much replayability here, though. I just can't say enough. Anyway, that's it for Paradrops. If I've got this wrong or you have any questions, drop it in the comments. Otherwise, stay tuned for more.